When beginners hear the word collection in cybersecurity, they often imagine collecting everything, storing it forever, and letting some future analysis figure out what matters. In operational technology, OT, that approach can backfire because collecting data has costs, and those costs show up as performance impact, storage burden, operational friction, and sometimes even safety risk if collection changes how systems behave. A collection management framework is the disciplined approach to deciding what evidence you need, where it should come from, how often it should be collected, and how it will be used to support decisions. In other words, it is how you avoid drowning in data while still having enough visibility to detect threats, investigate incidents, and prove integrity during recovery. The word framework here does not mean a complicated bureaucracy. It means a consistent set of questions and rules that guide collection choices. In OT, those choices must respect determinism and uptime constraints, and they must align with what matters most: safe control, reliable operation, and accountable change. If you collect too little, you operate blind and cannot prove what happened. If you collect too much, you overwhelm systems and people, and the most important signals get lost in noise. The goal is targeted, purposeful collection that builds trust you can prove. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful way to start is to recognize that collection is not just a security activity, it is a decision support activity. You collect data because you expect to answer certain questions, such as who accessed a system, what changed, whether a boundary was crossed, or whether a process indicator behaved abnormally. In OT, those questions are often tied to physical consequence. If a controller behaves unexpectedly, you want evidence of whether logic changed, whether an engineering session occurred, and whether network traffic patterns shifted. If a vendor support window occurred, you want evidence of who connected, what systems were reached, and what changes were made. If an outage happens, you want evidence to distinguish between failure, misconfiguration, and malicious activity. Beginners sometimes think the value of collection is in the data itself, but the value is in the ability to produce answers quickly and confidently under pressure. A collection framework begins by identifying the decisions you must make during routine operations, during abnormal conditions, and during incidents. Then it works backward to identify the minimum evidence needed to support those decisions. This is how you design collection that is sufficient, sustainable, and safe. The next key concept is scope, because not everything in an OT environment has the same criticality or the same ability to produce useful telemetry. Collection should be aligned to criticality and to blast radius. Systems that can change control logic, enforce segmentation boundaries, provide remote access, or support safety functions are high leverage and deserve stronger, more reliable collection. Systems that are low impact and isolated may need less collection, especially if collection would create operational risk. Beginners often default to collecting from what is easy, like general-purpose servers, and ignoring what is hard, like embedded devices, but a framework pushes you to focus on what matters rather than what is convenient. Scope also includes where you can safely collect. Some OT devices may not support heavy logging or frequent polling, and forcing collection can destabilize them. In those cases, collection might shift to the network level or to the management systems around them. The framework should therefore include a principle of least disruption. Collect in ways that do not alter the behavior of sensitive control components. A well-scoped plan produces a balanced evidence set that covers high-risk pathways without putting operations at risk. Once you know the decisions and the scope, you can address what to collect, which is where many beginners benefit from clear categories. In OT, high-value collection often includes access evidence, change evidence, boundary evidence, and integrity evidence. Access evidence captures who authenticated, from where, and for how long, especially for remote access gateways and privileged workstations. Change evidence captures configuration changes, software updates, logic deployments, and account or privilege changes, especially on engineering workstations, servers, and network boundary devices. Boundary evidence captures traffic flows and session paths across zones, which helps detect pivoting and unexpected connectivity. Integrity evidence supports verification that systems are in known good states, such as checks that controller programs match approved versions or that critical configurations align with baselines. Beginners should notice that these categories are not tool-specific. They are about the types of questions you need to answer. When you capture evidence in these categories, you can reconstruct the story of an event. Without at least some coverage in these categories, incidents become debates and guesswork. The framework's job is to ensure that the evidence you collect maps directly to the questions you must answer. How often to collect is another central question, and it is where OT constraints make disciplined choices essential. Some evidence must be near real time because delayed detection increases risk, such as alerts about unauthorized remote sessions or unusual traffic crossing a boundary. Other evidence can be collected periodically because it changes slowly, such as software inventory data, firmware versions, or configuration baselines. Beginners often assume everything should be collected constantly, but constant collection can overload systems and create more data than anyone can manage. A framework helps you set collection cadence based on risk and change rate. High risk, fast-changing events like authentication and remote sessions often require more frequent collection because they can quickly lead to impact. Slow-changing properties like asset attributes can be validated on a schedule because the operational value comes from accuracy, not from second-by-second updates. Cadence also depends on how evidence will be used. If you intend to detect anomalies quickly, you need timely data. If you intend to support audits and post-incident analysis, you need consistent retention and integrity. The best cadence decisions are those that align to operational reality while still supporting meaningful detection and investigation. The why behind collection is what makes the framework coherent, because why forces you to define the purpose of each collected item and prevents collection from becoming a habit without value. For each category of data, you should be able to explain what decision it supports, what risk it mitigates, and what action it enables. This is especially important in OT because collection can introduce risk if it changes performance or creates new dependencies. Beginners should learn to treat collection like an engineering change. It should have requirements, acceptance criteria, and an understanding of side effects. If you collect network traffic, you should know where the sensor sits and whether its failure could affect operations. If you collect logs from a server, you should know whether the log agent or forwarding mechanism could consume resources and cause instability. If you collect configuration baselines, you should know how those baselines will be validated and who will respond to discrepancies. When the why is clear, collection becomes defensible because you can justify it to operations and leadership as a safety and resilience enabler. When the why is unclear, collection becomes an argument because it looks like overhead. A strong framework keeps the why attached to the what and the how often, so the program stays aligned with real needs. A collection management framework also includes the idea of quality, because collecting low-quality data can be worse than collecting none. Quality includes completeness, accuracy, consistency, and time alignment. If logs are missing key fields, they may not support investigation. If timestamps are inconsistent, correlation becomes unreliable. If retention is too short, you may lose evidence before you realize it is needed. If data is stored in a way that can be altered, trust is undermined. And in OT, trust is the foundation of safe decision-making. Beginners should understand that quality is not only technical, it is also procedural. For example, if change records exist but are not consistently linked to the technical events they represent, then the ability to prove whether a change was authorized is reduced. A framework should therefore include quality checks, such as ensuring that critical sources are reporting regularly, that silent failures are detected, and that the most important data is retained long enough to support investigation and recovery. Quality also includes the ability to retrieve and interpret the data under pressure. Data that cannot be found quickly is not operationally useful. The framework should produce evidence that is both trustworthy and usable. Another important element is prioritization during constraints, because most organizations cannot collect everything they might want. Storage is finite, staff time is finite, and the number of systems that can be safely instrumented is finite. A framework provides a rational way to choose, starting with the highest consequence pathways and expanding outward. For example, you might prioritize collection from remote access gateways, engineering workstations, and network boundary devices because they are common entry and pivot points. You might then prioritize collection from servers that support visibility and coordination, such as historian and management systems. You might also prioritize collection that supports integrity verification, such as records of controller program deployments and configuration baselines. Beginners should understand that this prioritization is not about ignoring lower-risk areas. It is about building a strong core that prevents the most harmful outcomes. Over time, as the program matures and as trust builds, the collection scope can expand. But if the program begins with too broad a scope, it may collapse under its own weight, and then the organization ends up with inconsistent coverage and unreliable data. A disciplined framework helps you start small, succeed, and then expand responsibly. Collection in OT also needs to consider separation between collection and control, because a common resilience principle is that monitoring should not become a single point of failure for operations. If an OT process depends on a monitoring system to function, then monitoring failure can cause operational disruption, which is the opposite of resilience. Beginners should learn that good collection design aims to be non-intrusive and decoupled, meaning collection should observe rather than control whenever possible. It should also fail safely, meaning that if a collection mechanism fails, operations should continue and the failure should be detectable and fixable. This is where careful architecture matters. A collection pipeline that is too tightly integrated can create cascading failures, such as when log forwarding saturates network links or when a misconfigured collector consumes resources on critical servers. A framework helps prevent these issues by requiring that collection changes be evaluated for performance impact and dependency risk. In OT, the collection system is itself part of the environment and must be treated as an asset with its own criticality and resilience plan. When beginners appreciate that, they stop thinking of logging as free and start thinking of it as an engineered capability. As the framework becomes part of daily practice, it also supports continuous improvement because it creates feedback loops. When an incident occurs, you can evaluate whether the collected evidence was sufficient, whether it arrived in time, and whether it was trustworthy. If gaps are found, you can adjust what you collect or how often you collect it, and those adjustments become part of the program's evolution. When false alarms occur, you can refine collection or interpretation to reduce noise. When performance issues appear, you can adjust collection mechanisms to protect determinism. Beginners should understand that collection frameworks are not static. They are living systems that must evolve with the environment. New assets are installed, new vendor pathways are introduced, and new threats emerge, and collection must adapt accordingly. The framework provides the stable reasoning method that guides adaptation without turning each change into an ad hoc decision. This stability is important because ad hoc collection tends to produce inconsistent coverage, and inconsistent coverage produces blind spots. In OT, blind spots are often where incidents grow. A consistent framework reduces those blind spots over time and strengthens the organization's ability to operate with confidence. In the end, applying a collection management framework in OT is about choosing evidence deliberately so that you can protect operations without overwhelming them. You decide what to collect by focusing on access, change, boundaries, and integrity, because those categories support the most critical decisions. You decide how often to collect by aligning cadence with risk, change rate, and operational constraints, ensuring timely detection where it matters and periodic validation where it is sufficient. You define why you collect each item so the program stays purposeful and defensible, especially when collection introduces cost or risk. You maintain quality so evidence remains trustworthy, usable, and time-aligned, because trust you can prove depends on reliable records. You prioritize based on criticality and blast radius, so limited resources produce the greatest safety and security value. For brand new learners, the most important takeaway is that collection is not about hoarding data. It is about building a reliable evidence system that supports safe decisions when conditions are normal and when conditions are stressful. When you do it well, your organization becomes less reactive, less uncertain, and more capable of operating through incidents without losing control or confidence.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.